All right, students, welcome back to the live stream for Star Tutors. If you haven't been with us before, I'm Chase, and we will be going through the SAT, ACT, the differences between the two, and just talking some general thoughts about both tests and maybe how you can apply those to your decision making in terms of which test you should take, and where you should go from there. So if you guys haven't been with us before, one of the things I'll always ask is, can everybody give me a thumbs up? Just a thumbs up in the chat so I know that you guys are here and ready to go. Just a thumbs up. And for anybody that's watching the recorded video of this, if you guys want to post comments, we're also going to post this on the website as well. So if you guys just want to post comments related to SAT, ACT questions, which test should I take, something maybe more specific to you, and you're watching the recording, you guys can do this as well. So for anybody watching this on YouTube or watching it on the website, feel free to comment below after this is done. And again, guys, we're just going to go through and talk just a general discussion, I'd call it, about the differences between the two tests, talking about the scoring and how that relates and matches up, and then we'll jump in from there. So again, when you guys get into the chat today, can you give me a thumbs up in the chat or just a hello, just so I know that you guys are here and ready to go, and then we'll get started in just a second. Okay. Welcome, Praneeth. Welcome. Also, for anybody watching the recording of this as well, if you're wondering who I'm talking to, it'll be students in the live stream. So we always get that question, like who's but anything we post on the website, we always get the question about who's he talking to. It's this is a live stream that's going to be a recording that we post, so just know that that's what it is. One final thing too, guys, please make sure, if you guys are supporters of our channel, please make sure that you subscribe, help us spread the word. We want to be doing as many of these videos as we possibly can be. We're going to jump into the real-time testing videos that we've done in the past. And also, please make sure, guys, that you also download and register as a student. It takes 5 seconds, maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes to register on Star U. It's all free to download, free to create a student account. You guys can log in. And everything that we talk about in terms of your preparation today and getting better at these exams can all be found directly on the app. So if you guys have done this before, right? You open your student account, you click lessons and practice problems, right? You have ACT and SAT content related to both exams, and you can go in here and just start doing more and more English problems. And everything that's covered on the ACT is on this. If you guys want, I think it's 90% of the content that's covered, and the most important content is 100% free. If you guys are already kind of scoring in that 30 to 36 range that we'll talk about a little bit more on the ACT, or the 1350 to 1600 range on the SAT, you guys for $5 a month can purchase the advanced content, which also gives you access to the Smart Bubble Sheet on Star U. For those that have used the Smart Bubble Sheet before, you guys can submit your answers to real SAT and ACT practice tests. Again, this is part of that $5 a month that I just talked about in addition to those advanced content. If you want to submit your answers to SAT Test 5, the same one that's on the College Board website or on Khan Academy, you can do that here. And by submitting your answers, then you can come back to lessons and practice problems after you've submitted your answers. If you click here, right under suggested practice, if you have the Smart Bubble Sheet and the advanced content, the Smart Bubble Sheet will actually generate practice problems and practice lessons for you based on the concepts that you're most frequently missing. So you guys can see that I've submitted an ACT exam myself, and the questions that I missed most often, you see an ACT English test here, right, lesson chapter. We see ACT Math. So I highly recommend it if you guys if you guys have the means to do the $5 a month. Otherwise, again, the vast majority, 90% of this content is free if you click lessons and practice problems, and the most important content is free there as well. So that's really important that we get that out of the way first, just because everything we discussed today can be improved, again, for free. So does that all make sense? Everybody good to go with that? One other thing here before we get going. We have some, if you guys are interested, we have some more general information regarding the differences between the SAT and the ACT, including a fun 10-question quiz that actually does a pretty good job of telling you whether or not you're an ACT or an SAT test taker. If you guys are interested in that, that's in the video description below, so you can click on those links. But the most important one that's in the description below is the SAT-ACT Concordance Table, okay, which we'll discuss, and I'll pull up on the screen here in just a second. So in just a minute, when you guys see the PDF on the background of my screen, you can you guys can click that link that I just posted, and you should have access there. Okay, any questions, guys? Any general questions? Like I said, in fact, I'll post that as well. We do have a fun 10-question quiz if you guys are interested. It takes a very short amount of time. And oddly enough, it has been a pretty good indicator of which test is probably better suited for you. Short 10-question quiz to help you decide which test. There's the quiz if you guys are interested. It's fun. It's not very hard. But of course, the most important thing related to the quiz is that, or the most important thing in terms of your decision, right, in this whole process is to make sure that your decision is based on practice tests. So we start always, the quiz, like I said, is a pretty good representation, but, you know, I would always recommend starting with a practice test for both, and just to be sure, okay? All right, so let's jump into this. Everybody should, like I said, have the concordance tables that I posted. They look like this. One thing that we get asked about a lot, and I know a lot of students are looking for, you know, questions about really elite schools. And I know that we have a significant international student following now, which is awesome. Again, if you guys can help us continue to spread the word, if you're from a country outside of the U.S., if you can help us continue to spread the word about the channel, we really appreciate it. We've gotten a lot of great feedback. And a lot of students ask us about some of these elite schools, right? We get a lot of questions about MIT. In fact, the reason for this video was because of a student who asked about, you know, what are the admissions requirements at MIT, and how do I, you know, best prepare myself, you know, to submit the best application possible. And so one of the things that we will say is that it doesn't matter, and this is a really good thing to know, it doesn't matter if you submit your ACT score or your SAT score to these elite schools. Right now it's about 50-50 from any given year. Let's take a 5-year sample. Any given year, it might change, it might fluctuate a little bit, but let's say over a 5-year sample, it's 50-50 between the SAT and the ACT and what students submit to get into these schools. So these top schools, these elite schools, and in terms of making a decision on those, and this isn't, you know, that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but you want to make sure that you're focused on obviously submitting either, right, a great SAT or ACT score. It doesn't matter, so that's why it's very important to find which one's preferable for you, right? It's going to be different for each student, so find the one that works best for you, as well as a high AP score. So in terms of the AP test, if you're applying, let's say you want to be a creative writing major at Harvard. I don't even know if they have that department, but let's say they do. You want to make sure that you submit obviously a 5 on the AP English test. If you want to be, you know, you want to go to MIT and you want to, you know, study mechanical engineering, you want to obviously make sure that you submit significantly strong scores on the AP exams related to science and math. And that goes without saying, but just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that. But again, SAT or ACT does not matter. It's about 50-50 over a course of a 5-year sample or so. So just make sure that once you decide, there's too much content, right, to try to, and there are enough differences between the two exams. We say that there's about 80% crossover between the SAT and the ACT. So there's 80% crossover, meaning that the content covered is about 80% the same. But the difference here with that additional 20%, right, 20% is unique between the two tests. And that 20%, how do you spell unique? I don't know why I just added an S there. I'm an idiot. Right, unique. Okay, 20% is unique. And that 20% of unique, especially for high-level scores, there's just too much within that 20% to realistically study for both exams. Now, if you get to a point where you've taken 3 real ACTs and it's just not working, or vice versa, you've taken 3 real SATs and you're just not getting the scores that you want, then you can make a switch. But then your direct focus is on all of the content related to the other tests. At the time that you're preparing, it is not a good idea to be preparing for both at the same time. If you do make a switch from one test to the other, right, after you've taken a few practice exams and you realize you made a mistake at the beginning, that's okay, but then you're making a full focus shift, right, to the other test. Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up that's watching the live chat? And if you're watching the recorded video as well later on, can you guys give me 2 thumbs up in the chat or a thumbs up below the video if you want to remain anonymous, if that all makes sense, but the differences between the 2 tests. Okay, and in a lot of ways, you can see where this is coming from. Okay, so just for the record, and I know some of you probably, this is going to be repetitive for some of you, but the SAT and the ACT both have 4 sections. But the SAT is a little bit different, okay? The reading section, right, let's just look at the total number of questions. Reading has 52 questions, okay? Writing and language is like grammar, right? This is just the grammar test for those that haven't looked at this at all. Okay, grammar. This has 44 questions. And then we have two math sections. And the common misconception is that these are two sections. It's really the same section. One you can't, right, and you do get a pause and whatnot. But really, these sections are graded together. So 20 questions on no calc, 38 questions on the calculator section. And these are graded together. So this is a 58 question test, and that's all going to be, right, those are all looped in. And so when we look at the ACT, right, when we look at the ACT and we're trying to compare the differences, the ACT is very comparable, except there are so many more questions on the ACT in about the same amount of time. And we'll get into that in just a second. Okay, so on the ACT, you start with the English test, right? And there's 75 English grammar questions. And these two, the English grammar, are very, very comparable. These are almost identical. Okay, there's more main idea and organization questions on the English section, on the SAT. But for the most part, these are very, very, very similar. If you prepare for this test or you prepare for the writing and language section on the SAT, then it's 98% crossover, let's say, between those two sections. So those are very comparable. Next, you get into the essay or the ACT math section, which has 60 questions, and you'll notice that the content, right? There's 58 questions if we total the math sections together on the SAT. So these two, in terms of time, or rather, in terms of number of questions, are also pretty comparable. 58 versus 60. The content is a little bit different. I'd say there's about 90% crossover between the math on the SAT and math on the ACT. The SAT is much more narrowly focused on Algebra 2, okay? Yeah, Renee, we can talk a little bit about the AP at the end of the video for sure. The SAT is much more focused on Algebra 2. The ACT math section has some very, very weird concepts that they like to put on, just to kind of throw students for a loop a bit, right? So that you really have to memorize a ton of questions, and a ton of concepts, I should say, on the ACT math section, whereas the SAT, again, is much more narrowly focused on the Algebra 2, right? Algebra 2 and a little bit of geometry, but basic algebra and Algebra 2 are significant on the SAT math section. On the ACT, we come to the reading section, which only has 35 questions. And then we have a science section on the ACT, and what the SAT has done is they've combined some of these science questions, right? There's 35 science questions. You'll notice that the SAT reading section has a significantly more questions, right, than the ACT reading section. And part of that is because the SAT reading section has incorporated, right, some of the science sections. So it's not perfect, right? 35 plus 35 is 70 questions, and you'll only see 52 on the reading section of the SAT. But basically what they've done is the SAT reading section has some graphs and figures questions about, let's call it 8 of those. 8 of the 52 questions on SAT reading relate to kind of have a similar relation to the ACT science test. Okay, but when all of this is said, right, when we look at all of this, I should say, this is what you're going to notice, okay? And this goes into the major component of this exam in deciding. The SAT exam and the ACT exam give you approximately the same amount of time. Okay, so between the two tests, if you add up all the time, you're looking at probably right around 3.5 hours for both tests. Okay, the SAT is slightly shorter, but just slightly. Does that make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? So again, SAT and ACT are about the same amount of time. Of course, the sections are different, the breaks are different, but when you add it all up, it's about 3.5 hours for both tests. Now that's really important to note because on the SAT, there are only 154 questions when compared to 215 questions for the ACT. Okay, so you're answering 50% more, right? 75 additional questions approximately. 65, right? 60 questions. 61 questions to be exact. 61 additional questions. So there are almost 50% more questions on the ACT, right, than there are on the SAT, but you're required to answer those in the same amount of time. Does that all make sense? So that obviously, if both tests are used by these advanced colleges, by all colleges, and they're not only used by colleges, but they're also used for scholarships, right? They're used for admissions, scholarships. They're used for a whole number of purposes. Okay, and so as you guys are looking at this, there has to be some, there's got to be some give and take. There's no way that the SAT and the ACT could be exactly the same if there's so many more questions on the ACT. So the way that we describe it to students is that the SAT, okay, improving, let's say from a, let's say 1,000, right? Improving from a 1,000 to a 1,350, okay, is easier on the SAT. Okay, easier on the SAT. So if you're in this score range, if you're looking to go from 1,000 to a 1,350, we probably recommend taking the SAT. Now, on the flip side, if you're looking to improve from a 30 to a 36, right? So 1,000 to a 1,350. Let me just clarify this for a second. This would be somewhere from like the 21 to 30 range on the ACT, and you'll see that here in a second. 21 to 29, let's say. 21 to 29. Okay, and I'll show you that here in a second. And if you guys haven't seen the concordance table links that I posted, you guys can check those out. Okay, and then the ACT, we believe, is probably easier improving from a 30 to a 36, whereas the comparable SAT, right, the SAT equivalent would be from like 1,370 to 1,600. And the reason for that is because, as you guys saw, the reason that there's so many more questions on the ACT is because at the higher levels, once you get down to the timing, right, and this is very important in making your decision, once you get the timing down on the ACT, the level of questions, the difficulty of the hardest questions on the ACT are much easier than the difficulty of the hardest questions on the SAT. That is a very important acknowledgement. Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if that makes sense? So the hardest questions on the ACT, hardest question types, right? Hardest questions, the SAT is harder than the ACT. Okay, the hardest question types. Now, again, the good news about the SAT is that you get significantly more time. So that doesn't necessarily mean for all of you who are scoring, 1,350, 1,370 plus, that doesn't mean initially you should immediately jump to the ACT. But what it means is that you have to be extremely, extremely focused on the SAT when you get to the high-level questions. Like, I love to read. You guys have seen I'm sure some of you have seen our real-time videos of me taking the reading test. I love to read. I did really well on the AP English exams in high school. I think that that's probably my best section if I were to just say naturally. My mom's a math teacher, so I lucked out there that I knew a lot of the concepts solely because I was forced to learn them. Okay, but if I wasn't forced to learn those, the chances that I would have sat down and really studied math to get to those elite scores were unlikely. Now, because my mom's a math teacher, that changes. But on the SAT reading section, even for someone who loves to read, who does well on that section, I still think the questions are very difficult at the highest levels. I still think there's 1 or 2 or 3 questions on the SAT reading test for somebody who loves to read, who can get all the questions right from one test to the next, maybe not every test, but those last 2 or 3 questions are very difficult on the SAT. So again, going from a 34 to a 36 on the ACT, at that level, there's no question that it's easier to do that on the ACT, 34 to 36, than it is to go from a 1,510 to a 1,600 on the SAT. There's just no question in my mind after taking so many of these real-time videos, taking so many tests, doing this for as long as I have, there's really no question that it could go from a 34 to a 36. Can it be done? Absolutely. There's no question that you can still score well. We still have a number of students who score in that 1,500 to 1,600 range on the SAT. I'm just saying that you have to have a really, really high level of concentration at that level of the test. Okay, really high level of those last 3 reading problems on the SAT. The SAT math section is not too hard, so I wouldn't say it's on the math that's really difficult. It's the reading section, and then there's 2 or 3 writing and language set questions, typically on the SAT, that are also very difficult. So it's those 6 questions, and we know on the SAT that every question is basically worth a point, or worth 10 points rather, right? That's where you can quickly lose 40 points by missing the 4 hardest questions on the reading and the writing and language section. Does that make sense in terms of the differences between those 2? Okay, again, it doesn't mean that if you're currently preparing for the SAT, that doesn't mean that you should immediately change over. Because at some point, the ACT timing becomes very, very, very sensitive, right? Where if you've seen our videos, that guessing strategy that we talk about a lot, you don't need that as much for the SAT because you have so much more time. On the ACT, you guys will see it. I do this every single day. I've worked with over 1,200 students, and that doesn't include this YouTube stuff. 1,200 students individually over the last 8-9 years. And I will still say that despite all of that experience doing this, the SAT, or rather the ACT reading and science sections are still very fast. There's just no way to get over that, because a lot of the question types you've never seen before and you can't really prepare for. So you just have to be really, really, really focused in order to get those, in order to get the timing down. Once you get the timing down, which is the point of going from a 30 to a 36, the timing, once you get it down, that's the kind of the catalyst on the ACT. That if you get the timing down, it's difficult then to lose that. It's hard to, if you've watched our real-time videos and you get those strategies down, it's hard to lose that. Whereas the SAT, the hardest question types are going to be really hard no matter what. And so there's a lot less consistency with those hard question types, which again means that it's probably easier to go from a 30 to a 36 on the ACT than it is the equivalent range on the SAT. Yeah, I just saw the question about Ivy League colleges. Yeah, we can make a video about what's required to get into the Ivies. In a lot of ways, these exams, just to kind of correlate that to be focused on these elite colleges, really anything in the top like 25 or let's call it top 50 schools now are seeing these really high scores. You can almost think of the SAT and the ACT now as for these top colleges and also for top scholarships as like more of like a sorting use, right? That you have to have a lot of other things on your resume to get into these top schools, but it's to say like, oh yeah, we understand that this person isn't going to be overwhelmed by how difficult the curriculum is at Harvard or wherever you want to go, right? It's a sorting technique that you can take a test. Because at Harvard, right, you're going to have to sit down potentially, or at MIT or at any of these unbelievable schools and take a 3-hour math final on a Saturday. And that's why these schools still use this so prevalent. Like even this year with the pandemic and everything that's going on, Georgetown just released a study that of their admitted students this year, so this is a good note, in 2021, right, this year's class, 2021, 90% of students, 90% submitted their test scores, submitted a score. And it's a test optional year, submitted test scores. Okay? So 90% of students. So again, that just tells us that it's used more as a means of saying this person can take a test. Now let's look at the other parts of the application. For today, guys, I'm going to try to keep it very narrow because we are posting this to the website. I'm going to keep it very narrow to the SAT and the ACT discussion in terms of college and all that. So we can definitely talk about it as it relates to the SAT and the ACT and making the decision between those two. But we'll make a separate video about maybe everything that's required that goes into the college application process. And guys, in some ways we already have. We had a college counselor, a partner of ours, was on with me a couple of weeks ago. So let me just post that. And if you guys watch this video and feel like you want even more information, we can definitely provide that. But let me see if I can find this quick. Here it is. Yeah, guys. So if you have any requests here, so this is what you need to know. Okay. So I think, guys, that link, if you guys click that link, that should take you to another video. So if anybody's interested, you guys can click that. And again, like I said, that's one of our partners, our college counseling partners, and she has probably a little bit more knowledge about the whole college process than I do. I know she does. So if you guys want to check that out, it's me on the video with her and going through some of those thought processes. All right, so anyway, going back to the SAT and the ACT, what we have in front of us, and I posted this as a link at the top of the chat when we started the live stream today, and it's also posted below this video, and for anybody that's watching the recording, if you're watching the recording on the website, you guys will see this link just below. Just click the button that says Concordance Tables if you're going to watch that later. But what you guys will see about these concordance tables is that this is how the SAT and the ACT are scored comparably. Okay, so you guys can look at this and say, okay, where am I right now? And if I take a practice test, how does that relate? And everybody can use these to make that determination. Does that make sense? Does everybody have this pulled up and ready to go in front of them now? Okay, and what this is it's saying, okay, if I have a 1600, right, you can see that about every 30 points on the SAT is equivalent to one ACT point, right? So think about it as this way, plus 30, right, plus 30 SAT points, right, equals 1 ACT point. It's a general way to think about that. That makes sense? And it's pretty consistent all the way through. We'll see that in a second. Right, minus 30, right, 1570 is still in the equivalent range for a 36 on the ACT. For those that have seen, for those that understand these tests really well at this point, you guys will know that like the ACT rounds up, right? So that's why you get this range, this score range, because 35.5 is technically still a 36, which is why a 1570 then is also still a 36. Does that make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if you're wondering why that range is the way that it is? Right, and then right here we have 1560 to 1530 takes you to a 35. So it's pretty consistent. There are a few changes here where maybe 20 points gets you an ACT point, but for the most part, it's typically 30 points. You guys can kind of write that down as your number, and that's the equivalent. What I would use these concordance tables for more than anything is that if you're still figuring out which test is best for you, what I would do is I would take a practice test for both the SAT and the ACT, and then I would use these concordance tables to figure out, okay, where am I, how far off am I scoring, right? What am I like? If it's a wash, right? If it's relatively comparable. So I'd say if you're within 1 ACT point, you take the SAT practice test and you're like, 1420, and your ACT was a 33. That's not enough of a decision because you can improve. That's such a small margin. That if that's the decision, if it's that close, I would recommend just going with which one you feel more comfortable with, which one you felt better about. But if you're going from like let's say for whatever reason, and sometimes this happens, that somebody is just way more comfortable with the timing on the SAT because you get so much more of it, and it's for analytical students, especially analytical readers, right? Sometimes we'll have students that will take a diagnostic first test and they'll score 1300 on the SAT, which is a 28 on the ACT. And then they take the ACT and the timing just overwhelms them and they'll get a 22. And so if it's that case, then that just tells us right away that the comfort level on the SAT is so much more significant than it is on the ACT. So make sure that you take that. Then you would obviously want to go with the SAT. But again, if you're kind of right in the same gap, I'd say plus or minus 50 points on the SAT scale, right? So 1420 to 1470. If you're in that range on the ACT, then I think I would go with whichever one you personally felt more comfortable with, and that takes a little bit of thought. Okay, looking back at the two tests, which one am I more comfortable with? Does that make sense? One other thing to think about before you make a decision is that oftentimes if students take diagnostic tests and SAT and the ACT back to back, okay, so let's say one weekend, right, weekend one. Hey Jack, by the way, I just saw your comment. Welcome back to the live stream. Let's say weekend one, right, you take the SAT. Okay, this is something, again, this is very nuanced, but because we've done this for so long, we see pretty much everything. We've seen everything from every student, right? You get enough students, a big enough sample size, you're going to see some wacky stuff, right? So weekend two, then you take the ACT. Almost always, this score is better. Maybe you take the ACT first and the SAT second. Almost always the second test, regardless of which one it is scoring better, right? And obviously that's part of it is that you're jumping into the test for the first time on weekend one when you take it. And then when you come back on weekend two, you have a much better familiarity and you've been rested for the full week. So it's not like it's not stressful, but you have so much more familiarity with what it's like to actually sit down and take a test for 3 hours. Does that make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up? So that's just something to consider that if the second test, right, if you feel more comfortable on whichever test you take second in these diagnostic tests, okay, if you feel better about that second test and you score, or rather, if you feel better about the first test, you feel more comfortable, but you score better on the second test, a lot of times that's just a result of the fact that you took the other test the week before and you got the familiarity with the testing environment, and so you're more comfortable the second weekend, which is obviously going to lead to higher scores. Just something to think about. I know that's very nuanced, but it's something we see a lot. And it's something that I try to, in these videos, I try to communicate things that maybe you don't see on any other YouTube channel or you've never heard before. And that's a result of me personally tutoring so often that you see, again, not only are these recommendations and suggestions and thoughts that I'm giving you guys coming from what our other tutors have seen, but a lot of this is just personal, right, what I've seen personally. And so I'm able to communicate, hopefully, a lot of these things to help you guys make the best decision possible. So any questions about that? Everybody give me, everybody say good to go if you guys are feeling pretty comfortable about the differences between the two tests and making a decision between these two. Can everybody give me, a good to go or any general questions related to the SAT and the ACT? This video wasn't intended to be particularly difficult or long. It was more just to give you guys a sense as to what the differences are between the two exams. And then obviously we have a significant content library, and we have the app. We have a significant content library, video content and written content that we'd like you guys to obviously use in terms of your own preparation. But this video wasn't designed to give you anything maybe beyond just a general outlook and making the best decision possible for you. I don't know why, by the way, I just realized this. This is the first time I've realized this. I've looked at this table probably 1,000 times over the last 5 years, or since it came out in 2018, right? Last 3 years. And I just realized that they have a summary score here, right? Like 1570 to 1600. I was like doing it all over here, and I typically use this table, but they have a summary range right here. It's truly the first time I've ever seen this. Bob, we'll be doing another walkthrough sometime over the course of the next 2 weeks. So we'll do that. Remember how we did the 4 days? We'll do 4 days, 4 sections in a row, sometime over the next 2 weeks. I'm trying to find, if anybody has it, I'm trying to find the June 2021 SAT exam, like the actual exam form from the June 2021 test. We already did May and we already did March for 2021 for the SAT. I'm trying to find that June test. If anybody has the test form, a recent test form that they'd like us to cover, please send that our way. You guys can send test forms to admin. So if you guys want to send you guys can send an email to us to admin@startutors.net, and we'll cover any recent tests for you guys. But I'm still trying to get my hands on it. Praneeth, I'm very good at math, but not so good at English. Yeah, so the good thing about the English test, guys, is that that can be learned. The reading is a little bit more difficult. I mean, truly, for international students, I can't tell you how impressed I am that you put in the time and the effort for the reading test of the SAT, because the reading test is so hard, and obviously not, especially if you don't go to like an American school and you're an international student, so you're not doing like the same curriculum that the SAT is based on, the same passages. To be able to put in the time and the effort on the reading test is unbelievable. So I applaud you guys beyond what you guys could even know. Regarding the writing and language test, though, so the reading section is all about hard work and just reading more, to be honest, and reading, boring books that nobody's going to be excited about. But the writing and language test, if you guys use the app, right, if you use Star U and you use it effectively, all of the writing and language section or all of the ACT English section can be memorized. Okay, so if you guys go into Star U, if you downloaded the app, you created a free student account, and you go to SAT and you go to SAT Writing and Language, all of these grammar rules, punctuation, this is all rules-based. So if you go in here and you start to answer some of these questions, right, and they're all rules-based questions, then all of a sudden you will never miss those again on the SAT Writing and Language test. It really is that simple related to the writing and language portion of the exam. It's all grammar concepts. So that's what I would highly recommend. And that obviously is 50% of the verbal score. So just to give you guys some perspective on that, because I think this is important and relatable. With the SAT, the 800, right, there's an 800, we'll call it the verbal score. It used to be called verbal, but now it's called like RWL for reading, writing, and language, right? Reading, writing, and language. The 800 is based on an independent reading score out of 400. So reading is equal to 400. Right, and writing and language is equal to 400, and they're independently scored. So what that tells me to Praneeth's question there, and then Ricardo, I'll get to your question here as well. But Praneeth, to your question, the first thing that I would do if you feel already really comfortable with the math section and you're scoring very highly there, then don't go to the reading section at all. Don't worry about that for 1 second until you're scoring 380 plus on the writing and language section. Does that make sense, Praneeth? Because again, in terms of independent scoring, or same thing with the ACT, right? If you're looking at the ACT and you're looking at the English section, which is first overall, and then you're looking at the reading section, and those are both scored out of 36, right? I wouldn't spend a single second worrying about the reading section until I knocked this one out and was scoring very highly, because those are all rules-based questions. Even if you're not in an American school, right, or even if you are in American school, if you're not, I recommend the same thing for all students, is that they focus on the English section, because Those are just grammar concepts to be memorized. Praneeth, does that make sense? Yeah, absolutely. So math students, absolutely. Right? The same thing goes, Nicardo, to your question about math. Everything that I just mentioned to Praneeth about the writing and language section and memorizing those grammar rules applies to the math sections as well. So, right, math, okay, math. Praneeth, just for a question, because this is another question for you, and then Nicardo, I'll answer yours as well. Praneeth, are you an international student or an American student? Because that makes a big difference, right? In terms of improving this, and I definitely think that you can do it. There's just no question. And the same thing goes for you, Nicardo, right? If you're looking at the math section, right, focus on, first of all, if you're looking at math and you don't feel as strong about math, but you feel great about the English section, I would recommend the SAT. Okay, yeah, so Praneeth, hopefully all that makes sense, is I would definitely focus, right, on the 800, because if these two are combined, right, if these two are combined, and you're looking to get an 800, if you get to 400 on the writing and language, or you get to 36 on the English, right, then all of a sudden, if you get 36 here, and then on the reading section, let's say, right, you only get let's say 26, well, that averages out to a 32, right? That averages out to a 32, so that's great. Same thing here. If you get a 400 on the writing and language because you memorized every grammar rule, okay, Nicardo, yeah, same thing, right? This is just, the same thing applies. If you get a 400 here, then you have a lot of give, right? You can get like 37 out of 52 questions right on the reading section. If you get a 400 on writing and language and still score 700 plus, and if you're a great math student and you score 800 on math, that's 1,500 overall. Nicardo, same thing on the math section. I would first recommend taking the SAT, because the SAT math is it's significantly easier than the ACT in my opinion. While the ACT questions are a little bit more straightforward, there's so many concepts to memorize, and for somebody who doesn't, naturally love math, it's just too hard to get, to stay focused and learn all of those concepts. Whereas on the SAT, the vast majority of this, right, there's 58 questions, and the vast majority, I'd say half maybe, deal with Algebra 2 concepts. So you can be much more narrowly focused when preparing for the SAT math section. Hey, Rabab, let me see. We've had an issue with, guys, if you're having any trouble with the SAT, or rather with the app, just try it on, we've had a lot of issues with the Android recently for some reason, I'm not sure why. Star U. You can try it here, guys, if this is on a desktop version. So even if it's not working on the app, and we're trying to troubleshoot through that, so just know that we're trying to troubleshoot through that. But you guys can also log in right there on the link that I just posted, and that will work every time, or should work every time. So yeah, guys, I apologize if there's any issues there, but if you log in on that link that I just posted, that's the web-based version of Star U. Yeah, Nicardo, if you guys have poor teachers, right, same thing. If you have a poor math teacher, you just got to keep putting in the time and effort, right? It stinks that you had that, because now you have to go back and review so many concepts. But I would just take it one step at a time, right? If you go into Star U, yeah, guys, if you're having the same issue, we're trying to figure out why that is. So if you're having an issue with Star U, guys, Mohammed and Rabab, can you guys just can you confirm that the web-based version, that link that I just posted, can you confirm that works for me for Star U? We'll look into it. I apologize if there's an issue with the web-based version. I mean, with the Android version, or the iOS version. Nicardo, yeah, just keep pushing. Right. I would recommend that if you use Star U to help you prepare, try to keep it really narrowly focused, guys. And this goes for everybody. Rather than just going in thinking I got to get some score right, go in and say, if I'm looking at SAT math here, right, memorize one or do one lesson chapter a week, or one lesson chapter a day, depending on when you're going to take the test. But don't go in thinking I got to get everything done today. That's where Star U, I think, can be really, really beneficial, is because it's very organized in terms of, what lesson chapter you're looking at. Maybe you do 2 a day or 2 a week, whatever it is. Okay, does that make sense? Is that cool, guys? Yeah, and like I said, if anybody's having trouble with Star U, I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I apologize, guys, because we have Android devices here that seem to work, but we have had some issues, it seems, with certain Android devices. So I apologize if it's not working. But again, hopefully that web-based link there will allow you guys to log in. Let me just confirm that it is in fact working here. All right. In any case, guys, let's leave it at that. Yeah, it's logging in here, guys. I'm not sure what's going on with the Android version. So if you guys are having any trouble, hopefully that web-based link that I just posted will work. It's all the same content and curriculum, so hopefully that will work. But yeah, Mohammed and Rabab, I apologize for any issues you guys are having. In any case, guys, let's leave it at that, just so that we we don't have too much with this video, because I do want to keep it narrowly focused. But if you guys have any questions going forward related to the SAT or the choices that you want to make between those two, and for anybody watching the recording, whether it be on YouTube or on our website, please make sure that you guys comment below the videos, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. And then we're going to post all of the links that we used, including Star U and that concordance table that we talked about. We're going to post that both below this video. It's already posted below this video in the description, and it'll also be posted on the website. Yeah, so Mohammed, I'm going to try to keep it just to the SAT, but we do have, I would highly recommend going and reviewing. We're actually going to do a punctuation lesson specifically on the SAT, but in the meantime, I would highly recommend going and watching some of our SAT real-time videos, or our ACT. I know that this doesn't help tremendously, but the ACT and the SAT, like I said, the writing and language and the English sections between the two are extremely comparable, like 99% crossover. So if you are interested, we did a video on the ACT English section, but again, it's all going to apply to the SAT as well. So most important grammar concepts to review. And you can find it under that link. So hopefully that works, Mohammed. I apologize that that we haven't done the SAT video yet, but we will, and we'll very narrowly focus on the SAT. Praneeth, yeah, from a 310 on the reading section, it just is, you got to keep pushing. You got to keep working at it. Like I said, if you're already at a 400 with the writing and language section, then you just got to keep doing more and more reading. Read boring books, right? That I know that's not great that you have to be doing that, but I would read boring books, boring English books like Frankenstein. I always use that as the example. You have to read that under the American curriculum. You read Frankenstein as a sophomore in high school, as a 10th grader. I would read that book and just keep reading boring things. But before you do that, make sure that you get to a 400 on the writing and language section before focusing on reading at all. Once you're at a 400, then just start reading outside of the SAT and read as boring of books as possible and try to stay as focused as you can. Because if you read the most boring books, the SAT passages aren't the most boring. They're not great, but they're not the most boring. So it's almost like taking a step in an easier direction if you start with that outside of preparing for the test. Does that make sense, Praneeth? Give me a thumbs up. Otherwise, guys, like I said, I want to stay very focused on this SAT versus ACT for this video. We're going to be doing a lot more videos over the course of the next month, so make sure that you tune in. For anybody that hasn't subscribed to the channel yet, please make sure that you do so, and please help us spread the word. I really, really appreciate all of the support and all of the great comments that you guys have been giving us and feedback. That's why this video was made. And please help us spread the word. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Please tell your friends. And the more people that we get to subscribe, obviously, the more of these videos we can do and really dedicate kind of a full-time, we can dedicate it to a full-time. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. If you guys have any questions for us, like I said, post below the video. This will be posted on the website as well. And yeah, guys, we'll see you guys for the next live stream. Should be here in the next, we'll have a couple live streams next week, so look out for those. Awesome, guys. Have a great rest of your day. See ya.